Hi everyone, welcome back to another one of our videos. This time round we're back on the topic of cybersecurity, but in particular today we want to talk about that next level of cybersecurity, that for those businesses who have got an additional need, additional sort of sensitivity around their data. And to do that, as always, I've gathered a couple of people from the HPP group, and we've also got a guest with us today. So firstly, from the HPP group, we've got James Royle and we've got Andy Palmer. And we're also joined by Andrew Mitchell from Bulletproof. So welcome, Andrew. And do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself and to Bulletproof as well?
Sure. So Bulletproof's a cybersecurity company based down south in England. We've got a wide range of solutions from pen testing through to kind of more managed offerings. And I actually head up the partner team here. So looking after people like yourself and everything commercial here at Bulletproof.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get started then. So obviously James has been on a few of these sessions we've done before talking around cybersecurity, and today we're talking about that next level up, James. So how would a business recognise or identify that they are that next level up? What are the sort of trigger points that might make them think they're more vulnerable or the impacts could be higher?
Okay, so we've talked about in the past that everybody's going to be vulnerable to cyber attacks, but the next layer up, if you like, that should be ultra cautious are those companies that have got valuable data, those companies that feel though that data might be valuable on the open market. There might be a public facing company, so fairly well known, or might be owned by a fairly well known person. Anything that really they think, you know, if that data got out into the big wide world, how detrimental would it be to them or beneficial to their competitors?
Okay, and Andy Palmer, obviously I probably need to just define which Andy on this one as well. I've got two of you. You obviously work with our customers around cybersecurity, and we always say you can't keep adding these layers, and it might become as a bit of a shock for us to then say, oh, there's another layer on top of that as well. So why aren't the sort of, if you like, why aren't your antiviruses and your firewalls of the world, why aren't they good enough protection for this? Why are we going into kind of another level?
The thing with other levels is that the more layers you add, it's a bit like stacking Swiss cheese. The more you stack on top of it, the harder it is. At some point, it's going to hit something and stop the attack. So once you've got the AVs, once you've got the firewalls, once you've got the logins being monitored, you then need to start pulling all that information in and then doing something with it. So the next step is monitoring, being able to see what is actually happening across your landscape, to see if you can detect a threat. And there's multiple different types of threats. So you've got your common antivirus. Well, who's checking your event logs? Who's using that data to make sure that workstation hasn't gone rogue? And it's that next step. It's the monitoring, filtering and sorting of all the data that's being collected.
Okay. And so Andrew Mitchell, on this one, your experience of this, obviously you will have seen businesses who possibly have fallen foul to this before coming to you. Hopefully you would have seen things that your software and your solutions have stopped as well. What does that real world look like when it comes to this level of attacks that are aiming to or designed to get around just kind of, if you like, your standard cybersecurity solutions?
Yeah, I guess the key is when they hit the clients, it's all about disruption. And you don't want to stop that, that business continuity that we all have. We're all running day to day. We've done a great job, in the last year of all shifting out and working from home. It creates risks. But I think once you've been breached, there's a number of things that you can go to. We all see lots of different case studies in the news, the big brands that get hit, the reputational damage that comes with that. But beyond that, you're looking at theft. You're looking at theft of data. Potentially financial losses are fairly prevalent as well. And financial losses can be quite large. They can come from just the cost of the general response all the way through to potentially lost revenues. You look at something like the TravelX situation. They were hit with a ransomware attack, the ransomware data kidnap, if you like. The attackers wanted a huge sum to release the website back to TravelX. And I think they almost faced administration off the back of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is it the businesses are missing typically at that level? Obviously, people do, and we talked about this again previously. People put that solution in, and then right, that's it. I can leave that now and go back to my day job. What is it that they're missing if that isn't being, as Andy said, if they're not being monitored, if it isn't being kind of proactively managed?
Yeah, I think that's the key. Andy hit the nail on the head. Most organizations, once you've got all your solutions in place, lots of cybersecurity data is being raised every day, but who in the team is actually responsible for that, and who's monitoring it, and who's raising the issues back to the teams that are going to go and do something about it, the engineers. So we have a 24/7 SOC that would proactively collect, monitor, and look at those logs to try and raise flags earlier on in the process.
And what is it they're looking for? They're looking for activity that is maybe unsuccessful. So I'm guessing in most scenarios where our software is saying, right, you've been hacked, let's do something about it. Is this looking for those attempts that maybe aren't successful and give you those early warning signs? Is that what customers should how they could understand it?
Yeah, lots of early warning signs. Also looking to triangulate different data points as well, so different security logs, and see if we're seeing similar types of attacks across different areas of the infrastructure. Impossible geographic travel is always something that comes up. If your directors are based here in England and suddenly you're getting lots of access requests from China, something's going to be quite suspicious about that. But essentially looking across the landscape, looking for things that our team know, and we have a team that research this every day, to make sure that we're right on top of the latest security trends, so that we can be looking for the latest security breach attempts and all the historical ones that we've sort of compiled in the library, if you like.
And just to go back to you, Andy, P, in terms of what the feasibility of this, I mean, we talk about phishing attacks happen every day, and that people need to just be on their guard permanently. How often are these sort of attacks happening that aren't getting through, and that, like say, spoofing locations and all of that side of things, or attempting to log in from different locations? How common is this? Is this a once every now and again thing, or is it just as common as phishing?
When I normally talk to customers about this, I try and say, like, I'm not trying to scare you, but it does happen all the time. Basically, if you put a system on the internet, if it's got a public IP address, you give it a couple of hours, someone's trying to breach it. Someone's accessing it, someone's looking at it, someone's pulling the data from it, manipulating it, seeing what they can do, what they can break. And it's all automated these days. So what will happen is your IP address will blip up as saying this port's open, or like your webmail, you've got webmail, it reports back to somewhere, flags that up and says this server has webmail open. Then they'll try and narrow down the information and they'll attack it. It happens all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to back that up, we actually run a honeypot system as well. So as part of our annual report, we kind of flagged the stats on that, but the honeypot, I think in 5 months collected something crazy like 12 million failed login attempts. It's a huge volume. If you think that's your systems, that's your customer systems.
Yeah. And James, from your experience, I know we've talked about this on other kind of cybersecurity topics as well. What do you think kind of your average business, obviously one that isn't in the world of IT or cybersecurity, what's their awareness of this at the moment? Do they know these things are going on? Is it not even on their mind, or is it becoming more and more kind of prevalent in the conversations they're having?
I think most people will know that this type of attack is going on. A lot of people will just put their head in the sands and think it won't happen to me. We've mentioned this before, that it's going to be someone else that gets attacked. I'm going to be fine. But I think the level of company we're talking about that would be looking at this type of service or solution, the next level, will probably have an IT team or even an IT security team that are focused on addressing these type of attacks, and at least being aware of where their data is. So I think for your SMB, SME customer, if they've got a firewall, if they've got endpoint, if they've got server control, if they've got other security controls in, they're probably doing as much as they can do. I think we're talking about here about the higher corporate levels that will probably be aware that stuff is happening, but just how to address it and how often is where companies like Bulletproof come in.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the key, how often, and I suppose that ultimately results in how quickly can we respond. So I guess a question probably to both the Andy and Andrews in this one is, what happens if we do see a live attack happening and we can spot that happening? What are the steps we can take? What is the action that can either prevent it straight there and then, and ultimately, I guess, prevent it happening again in the future?
Yeah, so from our perspective, I think a lot of the key is in the preparation. So, making sure that we are truly working as an extension of the customer's IT team, we need to understand the process. We need to understand where we need to go when we see something being raised and how quickly we can get there. And for me, I think, if we have the right channels of communication, then we can raise it as quickly as we see it, or as quickly as we see it, then investigate it. Then you've got much more chance of nullifying the effects of the attack.
And like from like our point of view is like, because we'd be in the more the in the fixing of the system, so we'd get the report, say from Bulletproof, to say this has happened, and then we'd have to action it and put the fix in place. And it's again having those steps in place, being aware, and say like for an example, a multiple failed login attack, we could identify the user thanks to the software and actually fix it before it became a breached account, and that allows us to not have to clean the system up. So it saves time in the long run rather than trying to find out where the data's gone.
Yeah, and I guess that saves time on both ends of it, Andy, as well, because we might be getting customers that are seeing suspicious activity, nothing maybe has happened, log that as a call, it's time for us to investigate, and then by the time we realise that's actually part of a breach, then we've got to go and do the clean up and all that sort of thing. So it really does help us kind of laser focus our efforts in terms of getting that fixed and preventing it happening again. Yeah. Okay.
I think we're continually trying to improve the way that we proactively communicate threats as well. So when we see things coming in, perhaps there's a lot more attacks, as we've alluded to, than perhaps we will see. So we try and communicate that to our customers. How can you then proactively prevent something happening? How could you maybe improve your patch management on an X platform? So we're trying to take that messaging to the customers we have as well. And
Andrew, does this replace anything? Is this an absolute, as we normally talk about a phishing nest, but Andy's gone down our Swiss cheese route today, hasn't he? So we'll stick on this cheese route just to keep it there. Are we talking about another level of cheese here in that respect, or are we replacing other elements? If we've got this kind of more proactive approach, is there elements then that we can strip out of our cybersecurity?
I don't think so. I think actually all the other cybersecurity elements that you already have actually enhance the data that we actually collect. We want to see as much data as we can possibly get provided and sent to us. That gives us much more chance of spotting that vulnerability. Essentially, I guess it's an insurance policy. It's one that you don't want to hear from us, but when we do, it's usually pretty valuable. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So, James, obviously started with you in terms of people falling into that high risk category and what they need to do. In terms of an action plan, and I'm going to stop you saying just phone us, because that's what you always say when I say what do people do next. But how should they firstly assess kind of where they're at? What's the process to go through there? And then how should they build that into their cybersecurity plan in order of kind of priority and where that sits with everything else?
I think once they've got to the point where they're concerned about their IT security, it's time to bring in experts like us and with Bulletproof to start analysing how much of a threat they're actually facing, where their vulnerabilities are. We will run through an IT audit, which will give us a gap analysis of where the threats will be coming from. I'll be interested to actually, if I can bounce a question on to Andrew, in terms of if there has been a breach and they've lost data, what specifically Bulletproof, is it something that you can find on the dark web or something, or is it something that it's a case of we start from the minute you walk through the door, that's all you can deal with, or can you start looking at where they've had issues?
Yeah, so typically we wouldn't necessarily delve into the dark web. I guess that kind of breach it's like a legal activity. Essentially, we can't procure the data once it's on there anyway. So I guess what we'd probably look to do is something more down the line of like a penetration test. And we'd look at the infrastructure for an external view, internal view, and potentially some of the applications that they're running, and see from that snapshot in time how secure we think the infrastructure actually is. And that might give us a really good starting point of how we start doing the remediation work with you guys. And then obviously we can look at future advancements of that.
Yeah, I guess the answer to your question to me then, Phil, is preparation and do as much as you can up front before you get hacked. I know it's an easy thing to say, but do engage with the professionals and look and see how your data's worked with and what your users are doing with it to make it as safe and secure before you get hacked. So
yeah, I think it's a really good point that we're kind of heading towards kind of where I saw kind of the end of this conversation, but it's a really good point around the dark web and pen testing, penetration testing, terms that come up a lot now, and maybe some users aren't aware of what that means. But could you explain to us, Andrew, what kind of, where does the dark web fit into this? Kind of what is it, and what should our understanding be of as end users? And with that, alongside penetration testing, and find out how can we understand what a business's position is before we speak to them. So what's happened in the past, and maybe where their data is.
They reset and make sure they do everything appropriately moving forwards. The dark web is essentially it's a network that usually requires special config or access to get it into. Kind of sits using the internet to communicate. Businesses, I say businesses loosely, hackers will use it to either advertise their activities or potentially sell the data anonymously that they perhaps have managed to get from compromising an end user. But from a penetration testing perspective, that just gives us that snapshot in time. We can see where the weak points might be in your infrastructure and allow us to do something about that up front. And so we typically would say annual penetration testing is key part of your cybersecurity. And
is there a way people could easily see if they've ever been hacked and if their data's ever been? I mean, we see all these news stories all the time, don't we, of various different platforms, and I think any individual would be pretty unique if they hadn't had some of their data lost somewhere based on the amount of companies that have lost it. Is there a way that people can check and see if it's affected them?
There is. Incident forensics is something you can do. Obviously, it can be quite a costly exercise without that much benefit at the back end, because you still can't bring the data back, and you still can't. But you might be able to find out where it was lost from or where it was leaked.
Chances are eBay or LinkedIn, based on my own experience personally. I think there was quite a lot of data. So that's great. Brilliant. Right. Well, hopefully, obviously, I know we've not gone super into the technical detail this time, and hopefully what we'll do is we'll get a chance to investigate this at another level. But with this being a fairly new concept to people, I thought it was a really interesting way to understand kind of where that level existed and kind of the basics of it, which I think you've all done a fantastic job of explaining. So thank you all for your input. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us and being part of this as well, and adding that extra voice and that extra level of knowledge to us as well, which has been fantastic. And obviously, hopefully we'll be back soon with another video. So thank you all very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.